Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Wednesday, January 15th Finance Committee meeting at 4:30 in Town Council Chambers. First action is to the approval of the minutes of December 11th. Can I have a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes.
I guess I'm a second, I guess. All in favor? Aye. Action, approval of working notes for December 11th, 2011.
Motion to approve the working notes from December 11, 2013.
13, 11, whatever. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and just for the record, that Mr. McDonald is traveling and will not be in attendance today. Okay, our first, third item on the agenda is a presentation by the Expense Reduction Analysts.
Ready to go?
Yep, you come up to the
Okay.
microphone, and if you can give us your name and company information for the record, and then for your presentation.
My name is Kirk Menace. I'm with the Expense Reduction Analysts. My associate is Simon Silverleaf. He's Director of Expense Reduction Analysts. And we're here to give you kind of a quick overview of the company, give you an opportunity to ask a few questions, but the agenda is, time is fairly limited. So what we thought is we would prepare some remarks, very short presentation to give you a sense of who we are and how we think about things. And then if you'll hold your questions, I'm sure there'll be a little bit of time at the end to open up for questions. We'd be happy to address any questions that you might have.
Sounds good.
Everybody should have a copy of the prepared remarks, which is the bound material. And the folder contains some additional background information on the company and our experience. One of the things that we will say is that if you're interested in learning more, we would come back and we'd make a much more detailed presentation and have some case studies and some examples of work that we've done and be able to talk in depth about some of the things we've been able to accomplish. So the purpose today, as we see it, is to give you sort of an overview, let you ask, as I say, a few questions at the end, and then we'll see whether or not you're interested in having us come back. We are a global cost management consultancy. We're headquartered in the UK. The company was established in '92, and there are over 700 consultants in 30 countries around the world. We entered the US market in 2002, so we've been here, going on 14 years. The largest cost management organization in the United States. We have about 200 employees and consultants. There's been some recent consolidation. We can talk about that in the U.S. But we're, as we say, the largest. We're not the only, and we don't pretend that we're the only. We differentiate ourselves, we believe, in terms of the way we go about doing our work, which is to differentiate certain skills that we bring to bear on a particular client relationship. Most of all, we bring expertise in purchasing products and services in specific categories, and we'll talk a little bit about that, so that as we move forward in any sort of an assignment, if we mutually agree that there's a particular cost area that we should look at in more detail, then we'll put a specific team together to look at that cost category. Normally, we will have somebody doing the client management work. Typically that would be either me or Simon, and then individual team members will be brought together and consolidated around the client, but dealing with very specific areas of expertise and expense category reduction areas. We have procurement expertise in almost all of the major sectors of the economy, both from an expense standpoint and from an industry standpoint. And what we do, as I say, is bring expertise to bear on a particular assignment once we've mutually agreed with the prospective client that there are certain areas that we all think we should take a look at. We have sourcing specialists in 30 expense categories, and we'll show you what those are on the next page. And on average, we realize about 20% savings for each assignment that we undertake. For those categories, which we look at, obviously not for the entire company. We believe that because of the way we're structured and because of the kind of expertise that we bring, our 20% compares against 12 to 15% for most of the others, at least based on the knowledge that we have. And last year, we saved our clients about $46 million in annual savings in the U.S. market. The next page gives you an idea of where we have category specialists. I will note that there are some of those have either an A or a B or an A and B in them, after them. To give you some sense of one, we looked at your December 12th Finance Committee meeting video, and we noted a couple of areas that we were talking about in that, and we just highlighted that those are areas where we do have expertise. The two that we recall seeing in the video were that you were talking about mechanical maintenance and bank fees, and I think later in this session you're going to have some discussion about bank fees. That's an area where we do have a great deal of expertise and have a number of successful cases that we can point to. Some of you may know, but if you don't, we are currently working with the City of New London. We've been there several months, and the areas that we have agreed with them that we will look at include utilities, broadly defined to include all the heat and light areas. We're doing mechanical maintenance for them also. We're doing stationery and office supplies, and we're doing cleaning and janitorial supplies. We're also doing office equipment for them. At this juncture, we've completed and are in the implementation phase for stationery and office supplies and cleaning and janitorial. We have decided that there is not, after some study, there's not an opportunity in the utilities area because there's some long-term contracts in place there that we have no way of getting out of. And we are still working on the area of mechanical maintenance and office equipment, which involves both leases and ongoing maintenance and service. One of the ways that we bring value to our prospective clients is that we understand the procurement process in great detail. And one of the things that we look for are people who hold certain misconceptions about what procurement's all about, and people who do practice their procurement in a way that's not very effective or very efficient. There are a lot of misconceptions about procurement. For those of you who have been involved in procurement, there is a generally held assumption that supplier pricing is the same for all customers that have similar volumes, and that's just not so. Pricing is, first of all, subject to negotiation, and second of all, suppliers factor in many other criteria when they decide what price they're willing to offer, and it includes service and order quantities and commitments and delivery expectations and inventory requirements and a lot of other things that go into the pricing formula. And all those are subject to negotiation. So if somebody holds the belief that the pricing is the same for all customers, then they miss the point about what are some of the key factors that need to be considered in the pricing negotiation. There is also often held an often held belief that if you have a strong purchasing person in one category, that purchasing capability translates to other categories. And what happens often is that purchasing expertise in one category is a function of somebody's personal experience and their personal interests, and categories can be very different. You take in the municipal area, and what we're finding in New London is mechanical maintenance requires one level of expertise in procurement, and office products requires an entirely different expertise in terms of understanding the marketplace and the dynamics and what are the criteria by which people are willing to quote certain prices and provide certain delivery. There is a feeling, and you people probably are part of some national or regional procurement groups. The state of Connecticut has some procurement groups, and there is a feeling that those procurement groups always can deliver better pricing, or in some cases value, depending on what the value equation is. But one of the things about procurement organizations and procurement groups is they tend to focus on the average and the prices which they get and the service commitments which they get from The providers are based on what the average is, and nobody is really the average consumer, customer for any particular vendor. So the reality is that it's best to understand where you fit versus the average, and it's quite often possible to negotiate a much better agreement by not being part of the group purchasing agreement. On the other hand, if you're a relatively small consumer of goods and services in a particular category, you're probably getting a real bargain from group purchasing. So one of the things we do is look for membership and participation in group purchasing operations, and then taking a look at what the average is based on in terms of how the supplier looks at the client base that they're serving in that group. And then we can decide, based on our expertise, whether there is an opportunity outside of the group purchasing organization that might be beneficial to you. And then in a lot of these group purchasing operations, obviously you have some commitments or contracts that you have to work out. But our assignments are typically 2 to 3 years in length, so we often have a time frame in which we can work our way out from under existing contracts or agreements, and we will always look at that. Supplier loyalty always translates into best pricing and service, and in fact the opposite is actually true. If you're a loyal customer and have been for a considerable period of time with a particular vendor, quite frankly, it is likely that you are not getting the best price and service, even if you had the best price and service when you originally went with that vendor, because comfort breeds laziness, and both on the part of the vendor and on the part of the buyer. And the buyer focuses on the things that are urgent now and are new and are up for renegotiation, and the supplier spends his time trying to bring in new business and doesn't spend a lot of time trying to negotiate with you new pricing or new service agreements that might be more in line with what your current needs are. So we often find that people say, well, I've worked with this company for years and I'm sure they're giving me the best price. And the reality is, when based on our benchmarks, we know that just by looking at it that they're not. Now, often we end up renegotiating with the existing supplier, and in fact, in 2/3 of our agreements with new vendors and setting up new implementation programs, we end up with the same vendor that you have today. So we're not out looking for a way to change vendors, and we don't put one vendor against another on the basis of change. We put one vendor against another on the basis of a request for proposal, and everybody gets a chance to propose, including the existing vendors and any other vendors that want to come in. We also are value-oriented people. We understand that there are a lot of non-economic components of value, and those non-economic components of value can be very important to your operation and to your ability to serve your customers and to serve to support your organizations. And therefore, we have to understand what your real requirements are and the extent to which your decision with regard to who you would particularly select to be your supplier is driven by price or is driven by a combination of price and certain other factors, which may be service and may be turnaround time and ease of doing business and what have you. So when we work with a client, we work with the operating people to the extent that the operating people are on the end of the chain. They have to deal with, if you make a change, they have to implement the change with our help, of course, and then they have to operationalize that change, and we need to make sure that what we're operationalizing is something that they can live with, and that we understand what their requirements are. And we build those into our RFPs, so we don't just prepare an RFP that's based on volume or based on what you're getting today. Because in many cases, if you go out and talk with the operating people, they will tell you that they're okay with the service and support they're getting today, but they would like something changed. And if we're going to put out an RFP, we want to reflect that change in the RFP that we're asking people to propose on. There is particularly for non-purchasing people, but there is almost always a feeling that volume drives the deal, and the more volume you have, the better deal you get, and that just isn't so either. There are a lot of reasons why people offer particular pricing. It may have to do with their desire, for example, to penetrate the marketplace, or to consolidate the marketplace, or to do business in a different way, or to focus on a particular sector of business. And as a result, they're amenable to negotiating prices that have less to do with volume and have more to do with their own particular situation and market segments or customers that they may want to go after. And those are the kinds of things that we take into consideration when we come in to work with a client and with the client's people. And as I say, we work with the people at the operating level. So we're really trying to get at the value that an organization can bring to the client in terms of service and support and experience. The next page here talks a little bit about some of the things we observe when we go in and look at a client's situation. Quite frankly, most organizations are, unless it's a Fortune 100 corporation, are under-resourced in the procurement area. And at least in our experience, that's particularly true in the municipal area. I don't know what your procurement situation is like, but organizations typically don't have enough people, so what they do is tell their people in the procurement area to focus on those areas that are more strategic in nature. And so what happens is the non-strategic areas, I'll pick an example, in your business it may be more or less important, something like office products. The purchasing and the procurement of office products tends to get fairly fragmented amongst a bunch of people, some of whom are clerical people and some of whom are professionals. And so what ends up happening is you get several people making different decisions about which vendors they're going to use, and in some cases we find situations where people are getting different prices on the same product, and in other instances we find out people are one group of people are specifying one level of product that functionally is the same as another level of product, which is very different in pricing. That's typically true in the area of office products, where there's a lot of OEM merchandise, private label merchandise out there that's much cheaper but functionally performs as well as the branded stuff for most applications. Not all, but most. We bring in a lot of benchmark data because we have people who follow particular industry sectors, and in fact we have groups within the corporation who work in particular areas from an analytical standpoint. So we have a medical supplies group, we have an office supplies group, we have a fuel and energy supplies group, we have a mechanical maintenance group, and those people are trading information amongst themselves all the time in terms of what's happening out there, what's happening to the supplier networks, what's happening to the underlying costs in those industries, which can be rather dynamic, particularly in fuel. And they're talking amongst themselves and reestablishing on a continuing basis benchmarks. The other thing that happens in this business is there are regional differences which are very critical, and we tend to have our people scattered around the country. So if we came in here to work with you and we agreed that we wanted to look at, I'll say, office equipment, printers and copiers, and we wanted to look at it from a leasing standpoint, and we wanted to look at it from a service standpoint. Well, in the leasing standpoint, they tend to be multi-regional or even in some cases national, but if you get down to the service side of the leasing of the equipment, copiers and the like, then you need a local attention. And so those organizations that do that kind of servicing tend to be either local or maybe small region. New England, for example, there are some organizations that do office equipment servicing that cover most of New England. And it's important that we understand, and if we're looking at something like copiers and printers for one of our clients, that we have one organization or one group of people who we can bring to bear on the national agreement from the standpoint of leasing, and we have a different group of people who may be more in tune with the local market from the standpoint of servicing the equipment. And we work that out with you, and we bring those people to bear. Now, it is likely in some cases that particularly where national kinds of benchmarks are important, that we may end up working with you in a particular category, and the person who would be doing the analysis you may never see. You'd have an opportunity to talk to them on a conference call basis, but in many, many instances, we work through a complete assignment, and the analytical person assigned to that is not face-to-face visible with the client. But we feel it's more important to bring the expertise to bear on it than it is to have somebody locally who may not be equally qualified to address the particular situation. We try to avoid a situation where there are multiple order points or multiple suppliers in order to do that. So if we're looking at a particular area, we try to find, and working particularly with finance, where are all the places in the organization where those kinds of materials or services are purchased. And sometimes there are some unusual combinations. Let me suggest that in New England, for example, there's a big consolidation within two industries going to a single supplier situation. The office supplies and cleaning and janitorial supplies are consolidating in New England so that you have W.B. Mason and Staples and Office Max and some of the others all offering those combined services. So if you're looking at, for example, office supplies, we would suggest that you also look at what you're doing in cleaning and janitorial supplies and see whether there's a way to bring those two together and approach a single vendor who could provide the best combination of price and service for the combined categories. But you don't typically look at those as combined categories, since on the surface at least, they're very different. And so what we look for is that. I don't know how sensitive an issue it is here. It's a big issue in New London because of some situations that exist there. But what we often find in the municipal area is that the schools are using one set of supplier for a particular product category, and the municipality is using another set. And again, I'll pick on office supplies because it's a traditional. Sometimes the schools are using one vendor and have one pricing structure, and the municipality has a different vendor and a different pricing structure. If you were to bring those together, each of those vendors would be interested in the combined business, and you could get probably some fairly sharp pricing. And since you're already using those vendors, you're presumably satisfied with the service and support you're getting from them, so you're not making a major change in terms of bringing in a whole new vendor to be considered. The next page kind of gives you a rough outline of our process. Another thing which differentiates us from our competition out there is we do a lot of upfront work on a no-cost, no-obligation basis. The first thing we do is, if you decide that you're interested in considering working with us, we'll ask for some financial reports from your financial system. We don't ask for any custom reports. And we'll take a look at those and try to decide where we think there are opportunities. Now, sometimes we don't see any opportunities, and we'll come back and tell you. But most times we do find opportunities. And then when we move from that phase with your agreement that those are opportunities that you would like to have us jointly pursue with you, then we'll move into the four verticals here. The first phase is an analytical phase, and at the end of the analytical phase, the first thing you'll do is you'll sign a letter of agreement saying that you agree to work with us and you'll support us and that sort of thing. Again, that's basically no fee obligation. We will then do the analysis phase, and typically I'll say 3 to 4 weeks per category. Usually it takes a little longer because it's hard sometimes to get people's attention. We would then come in at the end of that period and we would present a baseline report. If you accept the baseline report, then you are obligated to move forward with us. And you'll sign off at that point in time. And then we will move forward. The next phase is to identify some specific options that you might want to consider and bring those forth with our recommendation of which way you want to go. If you decide to accept one of those, then we'll go forward and implement them. If you decide not to accept them, then we would have to negotiate from that point on as to where we stood relative to the amount of investment that we've had in it. But what we try to do through the upfront work, where there is no obligation or no fee associated with it, is get you to the point where you're convinced that you want to move forward and you're willing to make a certain level of commitment to us, because we're going to start increasing the number of resources that we put against a particular product, against a particular project, and at that point in time we've got a fair amount of resource commitment and time and effort involved in it, and we want to feel that we've got a reasonable chance of being compensated for that time and effort. We go through an implementation process. Once you sign off and say, yes, I think this is the recommendation I want, or I don't like this recommendation, I like number 2 or number 3, or I don't like any of these, but I still want to see if we can find an alternative in this area, then we go back out and try to find the alternative. We are charged with coming in with an implementable recommendation which is acceptable to you. And then we will implement that recommendation, and then we review with you over the next 24 months the implementation process and take any corrective action. We give you monthly reports if it's a high volume category. If it's a low volume category, we give you quarterly reports. We get paid only on the basis of savings that we can document. So we're not asking you to trust us. We think you're going to save $100,000, and we want our savings share up front based on the fact that we're going to save you $100,000, and then we walk away and you save $40,000 or whatever the number is. We are with you for the entire 24 months after you've accepted something and we put it in place. And you pay us based on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis on the basis that we've proven to you that we have saved you the dollars. And we do that against the baseline. So you have an input at the front end to say, I accept that as a baseline, and you have an input every time we bring a report to you. I don't like the way you calculated this. I think this is wrong, or did you consider this, or what have you. So it's a pretty transparent process, and there's a lot of interaction between the client and our people as to what is going on, what the problems were, if there was any miscommunication, are there problems in terms of your performance expectations with the supplier versus what the supplier has delivered or is delivering, and then we have to go back and do that. One of the things in the municipal area, this is actually probably one of the best times for us to undertake a process like this, because you're going to be starting your annual budgetary process, and in fact you may be into it already, and that's the time when you're really looking at your costs and your expenses, and even your people at the department level, the people that we have to interface with in terms of, are they satisfied with what they're getting? Do they want to change their requirements? Do they want us to look at certain vendors that they may know about but have never done business with? So it fits very nicely into the process. The other part of that is we do almost all our own work, so we are not asking your people to do a lot of the work. We come in and pool the information we need. We set up the appointments. We develop the RFPs if we're going to go out with a general request for proposal. So we are very cognizant of your people all have a job to do, and this is added on top of it. So our answer to that is we do most of the work, and we do have to have some support, obviously, but we try to minimize the amount of support that we request and the level of expectations we have of your people providing support. So, and kind of as an end here, our objective today was to introduce ourselves, tell you a little bit about expense reduction analysts. There's some additional material in the folder. Kathy, I sent you an electronic copy of the 9-block, the printed copy, or what I call 9-block, the trifold. There's a printed copy of that in there. There is a printed piece, an overview piece on our government and public schools view of what the opportunities might be. There's some answers to some questions that we often get asked, and there's some feedback from satisfied clients of ours. that cut a pretty wide swath. There are no municipal people in there, but there are some, not public school, but there are some private schools. There's a lot, not-for-profits, and there's some major corporations in there who have engaged us and have been satisfied and have been willing to put their name out there. We also, as I think I mentioned to a couple of you, we do have a number of case studies and a number of other things, but this sort of a quick introduction doesn't allow for going through those, and those are the kind of things that are better if you sit down and walk through them as opposed to giving them to somebody to read. So that's what we had to say. We'll open up for questions if anybody has any.
Okay, thank you. Mr. DePoe, did you have any questions?
I only have one question and then one comment. And my question is that I'd like to see, if, is it possible you could give us a phone number or a contact at Norwich? Is that what you said?
New London.
London.
New London.
We will do
So,
that.
Our finance director could reach out to the individuals who are on point with your people.
We'd be happy to do that, but only after we ask them if they're willing to take the call. That's not a problem.
Okay,
We will do that.
I would like them and maybe two
I
other
have contacts, I
nonprofit.
can contact the city in Norwich,
Just
New
to
London.
just to get a feel for what's
Yeah,
going on.
I can call the mayor.
And the only other comment I had, I don't want to preclude anything that may
Oh.
be in your mind, but this feels to be a little bit below our purview. I don't think that Kathy and Bill and I are kind of on the nuts and bolts part of the, the vendors and what the vendors are doing.
Probably not.
I would defer to John. If John really feels that there's a need there, I would support, you guys or anybody who would be willing to kind of take a look under the hood. But I would defer to John if he feels that that's necessary at this point. That would be my opinion on it.
On your process, what's the size of the categories you like to look at, dollar volume-wise?
Well, we'll look at any size category if we're working with a particular client. The reality is that, if somebody comes to us and says we spend $10,000 a year and we only want you to look at that category, we're going to probably walk away because it doesn't make sense given the way we operate to put the resources behind it. There isn't a set number. We would love to have it be as big as possible, but we've done, depending on the nature of it, we've done assignments as small as $10,000 a spend, but those have been assignments with clients that we're already working with on bigger spend levels. Typically, do you want to answer that, Simon? I mean,
Typically, for office supplies, it's somewhere, if you have office supplies, janitorial supplies, if you have a combined spend of $100,000, that's about what it was with the city of New London.
Okay.
We
bigger
saved
than
them 7%.
We're 44.5 throughout the budget, other than the Board of Ed for office supplies. That's what I was just tallying up. May I ask a question?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
May I ask you, in this ERA process, what phase you were in with the city of New London?
the city, well, it's kind of a mixed bag. We have implemented office products and cleaning and janitorial supplies, and we saved them 17% on average.
17%, and what was that cost savings equivalent to?
Well, the base was roughly 100,000, so.
So you've
to
saved
start.
them 17,000. May I ask
Saved
what?
them 17%.
Which would be 17,000.
Pardon?
If it's $100,000, it would be 17,000.
But remember, that's forward projection.
Forward
you know, yeah.
projection,
Well,
going
that's the
forward.
next, what we think the next year will be.
Okay.
Okay, our savings are always annualized savings, so.
Now, outside of the city of New London, what other municipalities in Connecticut have you done?
We have not done any municipalities in the state of Connecticut. We've done a couple of school systems, not Simon and I, but the organization. Simon and I are currently speaking with Bristol,
Okay.
and we've had a number of discussions with them. We are currently speaking with Westerly, Rhode Island,
Okay.
and we've only had one preliminary discussion with
I
them.
can call the TM there and talk with them
But
also.
our focus is on procurement across broad categories. We will look at almost any sector of the economy. So, but we haven't focused much on municipalities. And actually, municipals are an emerging sector of interest for the corporation. And actually, we have a guy in Washington, D.C. who is in the process of building the municipal focused practice. So if we were to move forward with you, we would be drawing resources from others who
Okay.
have been involved.
Since New England and Connecticut are very unique because of our structure, outside of us, do you do anything with the county forms of government or anything like that in other states?
Well, in
Because
other
they're
states,
really,
in
we're
other
small
states,
redundancy.
yes, we've had no discussions whatsoever with county government.
So
in this
is your governmental experience, I think that might be the way, your non-federal governmental experience is somewhat
We're
a blooming,
New.
yeah,
Well,
I'm trying to
it's-
think of the
it's-
terminology I want
that's
to
a-
use.
that
An
is-
emerging
yeah.
market
well,
for you.
This is an area that we've started to focus on in the last couple of years.
Okay,
We have some successful experience with municipalities outside of this area, and we'd be happy to talk about those.
okay,
Our real focus is where do you spend your dollars, and can we do a better job of spending those dollars for you?
do you work with any purchasing consortiums?
We do not. In terms of being part of a purchasing consortium?
Yes,
No,
Or
and in
guiding
fact,
or
in many
assisting.
cases, as I said, we end up in a situation where we quite often can get better deals for our clients by going outside of the consortium. That doesn't mean there isn't a role for purchasing consortiums. We've just never been asked by any of them to help them
Okay.
with their purchasing.
all right,
I actually had another business that we did this, and I did personally, out of this area entirely, I did get involved with a purchasing consortium which worked with private schools.
okay.
And we got involved in helping them
Okay.
negotiate some rates on some things.
All right. Since this committee has a long agenda, I just wanted to ask him one more question. Is your fee structure based upon the dollar values you save, or is it established in advance of the savings?
Our fees are based on shared savings. So whatever we prove to you and you agree that we've saved, we get a percentage of that.
Okay, that's what I assumed.
So-
Thank you.
It's strictly that. We get all of our revenue from our clients. We don't have any vendor relationships off to the side. There are no preferred vendors. We're here to serve our client base, and we're here to get them the best value, recognizing that value isn't always the best price. Now, I've had occasion, and Simon has had occasion, where an organization will say to us, I want the best price. This is a category I really don't care. I just want the absolute best price I can get as long as they can meet my service requirements. And the service requirements are typically expressed in turnaround time. But that is very rare that we have that. I've had one. Simon's probably had one. It isn't typically, when we get down and we try to get to a point where we're developing an RFP and we say, well, what do you want this RFP to say? Then they'll say, first and foremost is price, and then, oh, by the way, we want this and this and this and this, and suddenly price is a main component, but it may only represent 80% of the decision factors that's going to be taken into consideration.
Unless,
We do the value work.
okay, thank you.
All right, I just want to thank you very much for the presentation. I'm going to see if between the town manager and the town finance director, if they could do the follow-up on
Okay.
at least New London, and if the other couple of towns that you've talked to
I have
at
notes.
least. And we will take that under consideration.
Okay. Yeah, we will not, any names of clients or names of individuals that we've worked with will have their prior approval. So we can bring in a lot of things that where we're allowed to tell you the name of a person or open up contacts for you. It would be good if we agreed up front, what sort of a person you wanted to talk to. Typically, we work with finance people, but that's not always the case.
Well, I guess we're looking for references. I would
Yeah.
hate to engage in something that didn't quite, I mean, it could be work in some situation and not in another, but I mean, just if they've got a few people to speak to.
I have enough contacts in New London, I do not have any hesitation, believe me. If they don't
We should,
remember a
we should
football game.
alert them to the fact that you may be calling them, though, because that's kind of our policy,
Okay.
okay?
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, great.